Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series as we've been talking to paralegal and lawyer bencher candidates about the upcoming election. As always, the views and opinions are of the candidates alone. They don't reflect me, Justice and Pieces, Charles College, or any other education institution or organization that I'm affiliated with. Continuing on our series this afternoon, we have Lisa joining us. So first of all, Lisa, thanks for taking the time to speak with us. And perhaps maybe you can tell us a little bit more about yourself to get started.
Okay, sure. Thanks for having me on. I was called to the bar in 1995, so quite a while ago now, but I've sort of lived my life in some discrete chapters. So when I first started my practice as a young lawyer, I worked for a small litigation firm in London, and it was a very hands-on, I was on my feet right from day one. I think I got handed a file, the first week and told to go and do a discovery. And I was like, well, what's a discovery? So it was excellent. I learned so much. I got a lot of trial experience. I was in court all the time, and I really enjoyed it. And I was doing that for, a number of years. And then I had my first child, and I had a little bit of a paradigm shift. I was very much, I would say, an aggressive trial lawyer. Most people would not have taken me for having any maternal instincts at all, but things change. So I did my last jury trial very pregnant. And then a couple of months after that, I sort of disappeared for a while. And what was going to be a 3-month leave ended up being quite a bit longer. So I took a break from practicing law for a number of years and raised my then became 2 boys. And as I was, I did keep a hand in the law. I did some contract work. I was basically a glorified articling student for a number of years as I did research memos and, class actions, document reviews, wrote for Carswell, things like that, just to keep a hand in it. And then as I was gearing up to return to practice, that's when I started paying attention to the Law Society, things that were happening, and became aware of the statement of principles issue. And having sort of been watching the unfolding culture war over the preceding number of years, I was immediately attuned to what this represented. And so I was concerned about it, obviously. And I raised those concerns with our local bar association through someone I still was connected with. And we had a meeting. At that meeting, I spoke quite uncharacteristically. I wasn't particularly political or someone who would speak on controversial issues. I kept my Facebook page clean of politics. But I just felt really compelled to speak to this issue. And so I did. And one thing led to another. A meeting of like-minded people formed. And then we eventually started the Stop SOP movement. And I mean, I guess my thinking at the time was, look, if I don't speak up about this, I'm in a position where I can, because I don't have a practice. I don't have staff counting on me. And so I'm in a position where I can actually express myself on this. And I know that there were a lot of people who were very, very nervous about it, because we put up a website and we invited people to post their names if they supported our position that the statement of principles was essentially compelled speech and it was not appropriate for a legal regulator or any institution to dictate somebody's principles, regardless of what the principles are. It's not the state's job to tell you what your principles are. So a lot of people wrote and said, well, I'll put my name on anonymously, but I can't, and I've got kids to support. I'm at a big firm. I can't go out there publicly and take this position, but good on you. Thanks for doing it. So that sort of led to the Stop SOP movement. And we ended up putting together a slate of candidates who would run in the next election. And I guess the rest is sort of history. Frankly, the people who stepped up to be candidates were by and large people like me, who were not necessarily at big firms, who had maybe smaller practices, who were a little bit more in a position where they could rock the boat against what has become, quite frankly, a fairly oppressive orthodoxy. So this time around, I've now been practicing fully since the last election, since before then. And, now I might as well put my hat in the ring as well and join everybody. I didn't do it last time because I thought I was just coming back from a long parental leave, and I didn't really have what I thought were the appropriate connections anymore. But anyway, that's my story, and that's what gets us to today.
So that gets us to today, Lisa. And I know you just touched on kind of why you're running this time and not the last time there, but the statement of principles has been repealed, right? It's no longer there. So what kind of brings yourself and perhaps the rest of the Full Stop team, should it be like mission accomplished, or what's part two here, the sequel in this election?
Well, I would like to think that it was mission accomplished, but it really isn't, because quite frankly, the people who would like to continue with this plan to basically radically shape the profession along the lines of their particular worldview. I mean, we're calling it wokeism, and I know people keep saying, well, "What do you mean by woke?" Well, it's social justice fundamentalism at its simplest. There was a time when it meant something else, maybe in the sort of interbellum period in the 20s and 30s. It meant being attuned to racial injustice. So it had a sort of necessary and important beginning, but that's not what it means anymore. And I appreciate that the Americans always do things big. So in the time since we've even talked about that word in our own campaign in the last couple of years, it's really become a big thing in the US. And of course, that sort of seems to taint us somehow. But it's a word that most people kind of understand, that it represents this growing orthodoxy where you cannot ask questions about this, the social justice ideology anymore without being branded as some sort of a heretic. You can lose your job. You can be called out on social media or wherever. You can, frankly, get in trouble with your regulator now, as we've seen. So this is a concern that I have as I see more and more professional regulators start to get, in a sense, kind of overtaken with this kind of thinking that you can only have certain viewpoints. I kind of come at this from a classical liberal perspective, where I have a great deal of tolerance for other perspectives and other lifestyles and so on. It's basically live and let live as far as I'm concerned. But when people start to tell you that, no, you can only think this way, these are the only acceptable views, you can't question anything. No, you cannot ask for evidence. This is simply the way it is, and you must accept that. Well, that doesn't sit well with me. And it's not that I am some sort of a, radical of any kind. I just think that is throwing away the fundamental tenets of our, Western civilization, which is basically, we do have freedom of expression because it's important in a democracy to be able to express and hear other views. I spent most of my life sort of sitting on the fence, as it were, in terms of political positions, because I always could see both sides. I could always argue both sides of most issues. And it wasn't until I kind of hit about 50 that I started to get a little bit more concrete in my own thinking. But I have always valued hearing a wide range of perspectives, many of which I would find extreme or disagreeable too. But I needed to hear them in order to understand my own thinking. And so when we start saying, no, you cannot have any other views, these are all that are acceptable. And if you want some substantiation of those views, well, that's like almost blasphemy. You cannot be asking for evidence or support for those positions. You just must accept them. And so it's becoming increasingly censorious. I don't know how most people can't, I'm sure most people have seen it or experienced it at this point. It was not so evident back in 2017, 2018 when I started speaking about it. But I think it's kind of everywhere now. And so even in my professional practice, which, of course, having stepped out into the world that I did with the Stop SOP movement, I became a bit of a lightning rod, or attracted a lot of clients who were themselves running up against this. And so I have now, with several clients, dealt with this in other institutions where basically a small group of activists, is usually how it starts, come into an institution and then they start to bully and pressure others to go along with things. That's how we got the statement of principles at the Law Society. That's the history of it. And it was recorded in an article that was written by the late Professor Art Cofield from Queens. And he kind of outlined the history of how we got the statement of principles in the first place. And it was through no shortage of bullying, frankly. So that was all happening before Stop SOP even came along. If you want to talk about, civility and decorum and appropriateness of how benchers should behave, there were issues before we came along. So anyway, I'm seeing in other institutions where I'm having to defend clients who have views that they express on social media or, other things that they're not getting they're not, in the health professions in particular, it's not patients complaining about medical care. It is activists on Twitter or whatever saying, I don't like this person's views, I'm complaining about them. And then their college says, well, let's investigate this. Did they say something that is professional misconduct? One of those phrases that is sort of easily defined by whoever wants to define it, right? So it's happening elsewhere. And I think there's still cause for concern. And I think that the moment we lower our guards, that kind of thinking is just going to come in and take over again. Remember that the Statement of Principles was one of 13 recommendations, all of which were designed to radically transform the profession, an accelerated culture shift, they called it. And so that includes ranking law firms based on their so-called inclusion index. It includes incorporating the Statement of Principles into the rules of professional conduct. It includes progressive discipline or progressive compliance, whatever that means. I mean, there's a whole host of other things, document gathering or sort of data gathering, I should say. You know, when you fill out your questionnaires, your annual report, which you're required to do to maintain your status as a lawyer or paralegal, you have to answer these very intrusive questions. Now, if you choose not to, I suppose that's your prerogative, but that data is going to get used and skewed as designed, for the purposes of the people wanting to use it. Murray Klippenstein, one of our stop benchers, has done an exhaustive review and hired experts to review the underlying report that led us to the Statement of Principles and all these other recommendations. The statistical analysis was so faulty that the Law Society claimed it was like 40% of racialized licensees experience barriers. But when you actually look at the data more carefully, it's more like 4%, because it was a very, very tiny cohort that actually answered the questionnaire. And they extrapolated that in ways, that were not statistically valid. So that's kind of his story. And he elaborates on that in some great length in an affidavit that he's recently done. That's on his website. So if anyone's interested, I encourage you to go to klippensteins.ca and have a look at that. So I mean, I don't think we're finished with this. Those recommendations are all just waiting in the wings to come back in as soon as the coast is clear. And so I don't think we can just walk away and assume everything will be fine. They've given up on it all. And we're seeing that very censorious behavior just play out right in this campaign. I mean, the fact that 36 of us on this campaign have been deemed unfit by the treasurer of the Law Society to govern. I mean, she hasn't even met half of our candidates. They weren't running they didn't run in the last election. It's again designed to kind of stifle, I suppose, anyone coming along and criticizing or critiquing the orthodoxy. You can't ask questions. You can't stand up in convocation and try and bring things to the floor of convocation to be dealt with in a transparent manner without being accused of being uncivil or causing a problem. So I don't think our job is done. I think we still need to come back and continue to work on ensuring that this institution remains politically neutral. And why is that so important in a legal profession? Well, because lawyers really are the cornerstone, the independence of lawyers and paralegals. The independence of the bar is a cornerstone of the rule of law. If you have every single legal professional in lockstep thinking the same way or fearful of stepping out of line, how are they supposed to represent clients who run afoul of this orthodoxy? And there will be many more of them as it continues to steamroll over us. It's not at all appropriate to be trying to stifle the independence of the bar. And so that's what a lot of these measures in effect do by kind of imposing all these views on us. And the other thing that I will say that, I don't know that people were as conscious of this in 2017, 2018, 2019, but maybe they are more so now. And that is that a lot of this is couched in nice sounding words. Social justice sounds good. I mean, who could be against diversity? Who could be against inclusion? Those are all wonderful things, except when you start to get into the nitty gritty and understand what they really mean by those words. And so to give you an example, after the last election, one of our candidates, Chi-Kun Shi, who came from Hong Kong, we put her forward as a candidate for treasurer. And our opponents took out essentially a hit piece in the Globe and Mail, calling her all sorts of things. The diversity groups came out strongly against her. And I thought, okay, well, that just tells you right there. She would have been the very first Asian Canadian woman to hold that position, but she didn't think the right way. And so it wasn't really about, representation. Anyway, I could go on and I will rant. So please jump in and steer me on course again.
All right, so let's maybe look at kind of the next 4 years. I know you've done a great overview of some of the points there, but you've categorized them into three main issues, right? Of how the Law Society has lost its way, right? Stop bloat, stop creep, stop woke. I think we've talked about stop woke there, but maybe we can look at some examples there of the bloat and creep and the dangers that may be for our Law Society and really what the role of a regulator, specifically a regulator of lawyers and paralegals, should be, given kind of what you've just talked about and in other professions where people may not want to comment on things, or people comment on things and then face a backlash, which is perhaps irrelevant to their own practices.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we have a statute that governs what we are all about. The Law Society is not a lobby group. It does have a specific mission. It has a mission to regulate competence and integrity in the public interest. And then there are other factors that it's to consider while doing those jobs. And that includes access to justice and other considerations. That's all laid out in the Law Society Act. It's very clear that there is a limit to the mandate. And so, what we would like to see is the Law Society to kind of get back to its statutory knitting. What can happen is when you have sort of staff-driven initiatives, like bureaucracies just tend to grow, So I think it's always healthy in any institution to take stock and see, particularly a public one that is regulated and doesn't have, does have some limits to where it should be growing, to step back and say, is this really something that is in accordance with our mandate? Is it something that we should be doing? Or is this really kind of, getting into someone else's territory? Should it really be left to one of these many other organizations to lobby, for example, the government on certain issues? I don't know, we haven't taken stock of everything, and I don't know quite where the issues are, but I think it's a healthy exercise to start to examine in the context of what our statutory obligations are, to make sure we're not getting too far out of reach. And I do think that all of these sort of ideological measures are just, they're not part of our mandate, and we should not be, we're regulating competence. That's our job. And obviously there are going to be some things that cross a line, but political thought, generally speaking, ought not to be one of those kinds of things that a law society should have any say over or be regulating people about. Now that takes me to another point, and that is recently there was a proposal put forward by the Proceedings Authorizations Committee to allow, actually it was a different committee, but to allow that committee to have the power to essentially compel lawyers and paralegals to come for a re-education session, to take this, whatever program they think is appropriate, in order to avoid going on to a disciplinary hearing. I mean, it's already available to them to present the possibility of maybe just having a little re-education or maybe it's on a skills-based issue. Here's something you can study that will get you back up to speed, and then you don't necessarily have to go on to discipline. But now they want to make that mandatory and public. So basically, without due process, without reasonable and probable grounds to go on to the disciplinary process, a committee of your peers can decide that you need to be corrected. And because I'm seeing it actually happening in other institutions, I am worried that this will become a vehicle for, again, this sort of, curtailing of dissent in the profession. So these are the kinds of things that I think go beyond what our mission and purpose is. We just need to make it clear that we're there to regulate competence. We want lawyers who are able to do their jobs properly, who are not defrauding the trust account, who do their jobs with integrity. And, really what you think on political issues of the day should be irrelevant.
Now, Lisa, is there a line? I mean, I know I've talked to some of your colleagues there that kind of, certainly reference Jordan Peterson, for example, but is there any line, let's say, for a paralegal or lawyer in terms of commentary, let's say on Twitter or wherever, that would sort of feed into an issue of competence? Or it should just be a focal point of, like you said, is there any fraud going on, misappropriation of trust funds, client failure to communicate with your clients? I mean, things like that. I mean, is there anything where that would ever sort of be something that, whether it's the profession, the PAC or a disciplinary committee, that would that be relevant to, you know, the ability for you to practice or, you know, conduct unbecoming of a lawyer, for example? Or is it just, like you said, focus on those main issues and serious issues of impropriety?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we should largely be focusing on competence and impropriety in the context of providing legal services, because that's what we're there to regulate. I mean, I'm sure we can think of examples where there is a line that's crossed, and I don't want to start, you know, proposing where that is. But when we're talking about issues in the political sphere, and again, we're in an environment where only some views are considered to be acceptable, whether they're right or wrong. I mean, you know, competing opinions on things that are legitimately in the public sphere for discussion, if we draw the line to include those kinds of things, we've gone too far. There is a line, there may be something that crosses it, but I think by and large, just political issues of the day should not be included in that. And in terms of just other things that are, you know, the stop bloat aspect of our platform. I mean, again, when you start to bring in all kinds of other pet projects and ideological things, you know, your budgets obviously and your staffing and all of that's going to grow accordingly to manage it all. So we've been trying, I should say, the Stop Ventures who were there have been trying to get the staff to look at reducing the budget. Like, just go through the exercise, see what you can do if you had to design a budget that brought about a 10% reduction in fees. What would that look like? Where would you cut? And that's not to say that we would cut those things, but where would you cut? Or can we go through the exercise of considering the possibility that maybe some of these things are a little bit too, laden with staff or there's too much spending. And then it kind of got twisted that, well, we wanted to cut libraries. There was a question raised in that same convocation about, were we actually pursuing funding from the Law Foundation, which does have as a statutory requirement to at least consider funding libraries. They'd done so for many, many years at a rate of about, you know, 500 grand or something per year, but had stopped 10 years ago, and we hadn't seen anything further from them, and no applications apparently have been made for it. So somebody asked whether that funding could be sought. And that kind of got twisted and spun into, oh, they want to cut law libraries. I don't think that is really what anybody wants to do. Although, you know, like any program, it needs to be justified. It needs to be, nobody should be getting a blank check. But I think I would say most, if not all of us on the Full Stop slate value the community and county law libraries, because we recognize that a lot of small and sole practitioners rely on that as a way of ensuring that they maintain their competence. And so that does fit in with the mandate, right? So the other thing to think about is that we're kind of embarking on a bit of a brave new world in terms of artificial intelligence that's coming down the pipeline. You know, we have to be a bit nimble too. So we can't necessarily say from day one that for the next 4 years, all of these things are going to be untouchable, because the world's going to unfold in surprising and unpredictable ways. So we do need to be nimble as the governing body to ensure that lawyers are being supported, that the public in particular is getting the protection that it needs, and that, you know, we're providing the tools that lawyers need to stay competent in an ever-changing world.
Now, so one of the other things that's come up, you know, certainly, you know, the civility, as you point out, or the venture code of conduct, and sort of this maybe I'm mischaracterizing it, but kind of this doom and gloom if, you know, the stop or full stop group now gets elected, and, you know, it's going to lead to us losing self-regulation, and the government's going to step in, and then now you have the good governance group coming together as a coalition. But if they're elected, then they're going to look at not having slates to continue forward. I mean, what are your thoughts on all that? I mean, what, in terms of, first obviously creating the stop group, is there anything, inherently wrong with groups coming together and running in an election like this? Or have you given any thought to, is there a need for reform? I mean, pointing out to like the less than 30% of lawyers that voted the last time, has that there been anything in consideration there from your group?
Well, sure. I mean, I think it had to be done because when we look back to 2016 and this, what I was just talking about with the bullying that went on to get a unanimous support of all 13 recommendations, clearly it was very difficult for one or two to stand up against this sort of juggernaut of very strongly held views and activism. So, it's not enough for one or two to just stand up in convocation and try and sway things. It was necessary. It was necessary for a group to come together that could withstand the slings and arrows, frankly, because there were a lot. As soon as you said you were opposed to the statement of principles, you were automatically assumed to be, some sort of evil person. We dealt with a lot of hate for taking that position unfairly, frankly, but those are the rules of the game now. And so if we hadn't had each other, I think it would have been very, very difficult. They always say the center cannot hold. I kind of think we're the center. We kind of came forward, but we needed each other. And so it was important to have a slate. Now, I very specifically did not want to have a full slate this time. There were people who wanted to be on it who I said, look, I'm sorry, I don't want to go forward with 40. We had 35. That was to me the maximum. And then Howard Levitt, who you met with the other day, decided to throw his hat in the ring at the last minute and wanted to join the slate. And so we made an exception for him because he was aligned with us and he was going to run anyways. And it was helpful to have him join us. So, but I did not want to put 40 forward because I value other opinions. And I think there should be other people at convocation that don't share the same views. But I also want to point out that our group last time really was not a voting bloc. They were very different on a lot of issues. It was actually a very pluralistic group. It came from a variety of perspectives, despite the slurs to the contrary. There were people who covered the political spectrum, some religious, some atheist, just a wide variety of perspectives. And they, within their own group, engaged in quite a lot of respectful debate on issues and voted differently on very many issues. And I just in the recent e-blast that we put out yesterday, we did a little analysis of the roll call votes and discovered that the benchers who were running on the coalition voted as a bloc significantly more often than the stop slate. And, despite having a difference of opinion on many, many issues, and very strongly so sometimes, and voting against one another's own motions. Despite that, they came together on the key issues, like getting rid of the statement of principles. And they also continued to be civil and respectful of one another, so much so that 18 of the original 22 ran together again on this new slate. So, and I also don't think that you can really get around the idea of slates, because whether it's formally declared as ours was, or whether it's the old time where law firms would say, okay, well, here, we'll put your people forward, we'll support them, let's get a bunch of them together on a shared brochure. There were endorsements happening, right? So it's almost the same kind of thing. I could simply say, well, I'm going to endorse those 36 people. I don't know how it's any different than running it as an open slate. So they can make rules if they want, but where we'll end up then is basically back to where we had, which is, the establishment benchers having the funds to kind of put the candidates that they want in place. See, that's the other thing too. The one benefit of having our slate is that we were able to pool resources and get a lot of small and sole practitioners elected who wouldn't necessarily have been able to run that kind of a campaign themselves. And so there were different voices than the usual at convocation, right? It was younger people, people from smaller towns and centers, people running on, practicing on their own or in small firms who didn't necessarily have that sort of level of representation at convocation that in the past that they did in the last 4 years. So.
Now, Lisa, last couple of questions here. Certainly, there are newly licensed lawyers, students listening, and certainly, I know you've talked about some of the ideologies that certainly in schools also there. In terms of if they would be potential voters one day, in terms of advice and the words of wisdom that you can offer to them, what would you share with them?
Well, I mean, I think you have to be true to your own principles. It's hard sometimes to stand up against, others who feel strongly about their views, and sometimes there's consequences for that, as we see when somebody tries to threaten your job or call you into the dean's office or whatever. But you'll live with yourself better if you stand by your own principles and find people who share those views. I mean, they're out there, and build a community of people who are more open to discourse and debate and shared ideas and just even engaging in open debate, because I don't think that a lot of students are finding that in the law schools these days. Not that I'm hearing. And but we need you if you've got a passion for advocacy, and you value that over activism. I think your voice is sorely needed in the profession. I think we're going a little too far the other way. So please stick with it, as difficult as it might be, and find other people who can mentor you. And you know what? There's a whole bunch of us who've put ourselves out there on the line, and I know we'd be more than happy to help mentor and encourage young lawyers and professionals who feel that they would like somebody who shares their views to help them along.
Perfect, Lisa. So thanks so much for taking the time here, joining us and sharing with everyone about why you're running for bencher. Last question there. Of course, there are lawyers hopefully listening and they get to vote and have up to 40 votes. Why should they vote for you in this upcoming election?
Well, I think we will help get the Law Society back on track. And I know some people are throwing around this scary word about losing self-governance, but honestly, we wouldn't have come along to become benchers or run for benchers if things had been properly managed and kept to their statutory knitting, as I said before, as they should have been. And so, if anyone is jeopardizing self-governance, it's the people who are using the legal regulator as their personal project or their vehicle for advancing their own agendas. So all we're saying is we want to bring it back to being a neutral regulator. Okay, we're not trying to impose any other ideology. We're simply saying this is the job it has to do, and we're going to do this job competently, and we're not going to use it for other purposes. And I think honestly that is what's going to preserve self-governance more than the alternative. So I think that your votes would be well placed with our group. Please look at our website and read the bios of the 36 people who are running. The other side has kind of made this all about the prestige of their particular candidates and the leadership. We have no slouches on our team, and there are a lot of people with great leadership qualities and skills and long careers, and representing newer lawyers, older lawyers. There's a spectrum of viewpoints on our group too. So please have a look and satisfy yourself that these are the folks that you can count on to get the job done that we've said we're going to do. And if you can, please vote for all of us. And that will ensure that we do have enough people to help end some of the rancor and just kind of get the work done that needs to get done.
Thanks again, Lisa. And thanks for everyone for tuning in. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.